Before we begin, I want you to think about three things. What do you hope to learn from this session? And just take a deep breath. Some people are like, I don't know. I barely made it to this webinar. For crying out loud, don't ask me questions. But just take a breath and go, well, what attracted you to this session? What are you hoping to know? And then, if you would, write down some specific questions you have about emotions, motivation, and ADHD. And finally, I would love for you to think about what have you done that motivates yourself? Okay, we're going to be talking about emotions and motivation, but what have you done? And why do you think it works? And does it ever stop working? I know this is kind of a rookie slide. So for those of you who are absolute experts, you can tune out just for 22 seconds, okay? But I do have to say this because this sets the foundation. Um, So for those of us with ADHD, yep, I know you guys know this, we have a dopamine regulation issue. Sometimes we have too much, sometimes we have too little. And the problem is dopamine helps us understand what to focus on. And so sometimes we will go into hyper focus because we have so much dopamine, we're just working on that sock drawer, where sometimes we don't have enough and we're like, everything is getting our attention. And even though I've oversimplified it, you get the idea. Um, and so a lot of us talk about dopamine seeking behavior. And a lot of us are thinking about, like, oh, how can I get this boost of dopamine? I'm in Michigan, and today it's just one of those days. It's a nothing day. It means it's overcast, it's gray. I'm not going to see the sun today. It looks like it's dusk all day. And, my brain actually gets a little bit of dopamine from seeing the sun, right? And those of you in California, sunshine states, just be grateful that you know that there's a sun out there. I'm not even sure one still exists. So, my brain today is like, oh, what do I latch on to? Where's my dopamine, right? Um, I can tell you where medication works very well. Um, so the other thing I want you to know about the brain is the ADHD brain prioritizes interest over importance. Okay, so I call this, so Bill Dotson talks a lot about this, and he's the one who introduced this concept. Uh, but I didn't even understand that this was a thing for the longest time. I think of it as ADHD logic versus neurotypical logic. So, what feels important to me is the most interesting thing, it's the most urgent thing, it's the shiniest thing, whatever it is, where I really don't register the importance. Okay. And so, for me to find the important thing to do takes a lot of work. I can do it. All of us can. It's just that's not the logic we use first. So, our interest-based nervous systems versus importance-based nervous system. I have three biological daughters, and two of them have ADHD. One of them doesn't. And the non-ADHD person, I've learned from her so much. And so I'm just going to kind of pick on her today. And well, she's kind of outside the door, so I'm going to lower my voice so she doesn't hear. Mom, are you talking about me again? But I kind of study her, like, she's very interesting to me because she doesn't operate the way I do. Neurotypical brains engage in tasks because they are important. I see her prioritize her to-do list every day. My brain, my ADHD brain, I need something interesting, novel, urgent, some kind of external pressure. And she's figured this out about me. We work together at the ADHD Center, and she's like, hey, listen, this is really important. And this is going to backfire unless you get on this. And then she speaks that ADHD logic to me. I'm like, okay, I'll do it right now. And boop, boop, boop. And I go do it. She does not require that operating system. Again, ADHD brains need interest, novelty, urgency, or external pressure to engage. Now, there's a couple problems with this. So this leads people to think that they need to depend on dopamine. Now, a lot of books have been written where they're like, yeah, just depend on your dopamine. How are you going to get dopamine? So a lot of books recommend gamifying tasks, beat the timer, randomizing, like, hey, I'm going to roll a die and see which one. One of my clients, she makes bingo cards for herself. Okay. And I want to tell you, these do work, but it's exhausting. And this is how I feel when I've been chasing dopamine. So when we chase dopamine, it's draining. And guess what? And you guys are already with me on this. And then the bingo cards stop working, right? It's no longer interesting. It's no longer fun for us. So constantly seeking stimulation can be mentally and physically draining. And there's research that's coming out that's very interesting, and it's saying, hey, those of us with ADHD, we have a very sensitive nervous system, and too frequently we're stuck in the on position. We're stuck in fight or flight, and we don't go to the parasympathetic nervous system very much. And that's because we're chasing dopamine. Now, I want you to hear me. That's not bad. But if you have a whole constant diet of it, that would be like only having McDonald's every single day for every meal. It's just not going to serve you well. I probably just offended someone because they're like, "Oh, wait a minute. That's what I already do." Okay, that's a different webinar. We'll talk about that later. So, all motivation is emotional. And I'm going to say this again, all motivation is emotional. Even for those neurotypicals who have full access to their beautiful prefrontal cortexes. All motivation is emotional. It originates in the limbic center. When you have ADHD, some, most of us, I'll say some of us, have deficient emotional self-regulation. That's a way to say our prefrontal cortex is not minding the shop. And so whatever we pick up in our limbic system, we tend to run with it as an emotion. Okay. It's a central facet of ADHD that carries significant consequences. It's not included in the disorder's diagnostic criteria yet, but research confirms it plays a prominent role in ADHD. Okay, so I just said motivational is emotional. And then in the next breath, I had the audacity to say, oh, yeah, and we have deficient emotional self regulation. So if you're starting to go, yeah, great, I'm screwed. Where's any hope for me? Well, let's try to understand. And again, some of you may understand this already. The system is the emotional center, and it's overactive. I like to say it's twitchy, and it makes meanings that of things, and that's why we're really good sometimes at like, ooh, that person was angry because we have a hyperactive limbic center, right? But it overpowers logic when we make decisions. So when a task feels boring, or overwhelming, or stressful, or emotionally uncomfortable, it leads to avoidance, not necessarily action. And so we really have to talk about what are we going to do about emotions? Because if all emotions are wound up into this thing we call motivation, what are we going to do for this? Well, some of us learn how to hijack our brains. And I don't recommend this at all, right? But I've actually done this quite a bit in my life. Many of us learn how to use our twitchy emotional center and just kind of rev ourselves up and scare ourselves. There was a time when I was a dean at a small college, and every day I woke up like Jean-Luc on the U.S. Enterprise going, damage report. Every morning I just scared myself out of bed, right? And so I learned to hijack my emotions. So it is true, emotions motivate us to action. It's true. Uh, Sometimes we use avoidance to motivate ourselves in action. So hear me out. Who is it? Is it Ramsey who calls this procrastivity? Yeah, love that he says that. So I'm trying to avoid this other big important thing I should be doing. So I'm going to go clean the sock drawer instead. And I'm going to line up my socks in pretty colors, and they're going to be all perfectly organized, and I will feel so good. So I actually motivated myself to do the sock drawer through avoidance, right? Next is anxiety. And okay, I bet every single person on this webinar has with ADHD has dabbled with the anxiety motivation. In other words, it's where you hurry up, let's do this. And you're kind of scaring yourself in order to do this, right? Now, just a word about this. Anxiety is one of those things that there's the Goldilocks principle that applies to it. Okay. Humans need just the right amount of anxiety to function. Too low, we don't do anything. Too high, we shut down. But those of us with ADHD, we're like, cool, I'll use it as gasoline to start a forest fire in me, right? And so I understand that we need a little bit of anxiety, but guys, you're using too much. So a lot of times that's going to wear you out. So sometimes procrastivity shows up, and sometimes it's just plain old procrastination. Like, yeah, I know I should be doing this. But you know what? The spirit's going to move at midnight and the paper's not due till 9 a.m. I'm pretty sure I can stick it to the man and write this paper, even though I was supposed to be writing it all semester in a few hours. Pretty sure. Procrastination has a little bit of magical thinking. It has a little bit of, there will be a time when I will feel inspired to do this. And then usually we'll go back to anxiety to inspire ourselves. Now, notice we're getting a little bit sadder in these unhealthy tools, shame and guilt. I'm hoping not a lot of you have this, but I can guarantee many of you do with ADHD. If you are an adult with ADHD, I also work with children. Uh, I see this in children and adolescents, and this is stunning on how they try to beat themselves up with shame and guilt. Let me give you an example. One of my clients yesterday missed an appointment with her very expensive psychiatrist and still has to pay for it. And during the call, she said 4 times, well, I've got to pay for the appointment even though I missed it. And that's really expensive. And I don't have that kind of money right now. She said that 4 times. And on the second time, I said, hey, you've said that once already. Are you aware you're trying to shame yourself? And she responded, of course, I'm going to shame myself. This is ridiculous behavior. And I let it go. And then she said it again. And I said, are you aware that's a shame statement? You're trying to shame yourself into behaving. And she said, why shouldn't I shame myself? Right? By the last time, I'm like, hey, can we call time out on what we're trying to work on? Because this shame thing keeps popping up. And right now it's a ghost that's haunting you. And so she was actually trying to use shame to motivate herself to never miss an appointment again. I can tell you I've used shame. Um, if I'm not careful, I could use shame every day. Uh, it is very difficult to show up in a neurotypical world and you notice the differences. You know you're not the same and it hurts. And you're like, if I could just be like that. And then there's the voice that goes, how come you're not? Right? So it's a really hard place to be. Okay, here's the saddest one. Self-loathing. I'm positive there's parents listening who you've already seen this in your kiddos. Your kiddos, they just get so fed up with themselves and they start self-loathing. I work with adults every day that just thought self-loathing was just a normal conversation that one has in their head. Um, when I tell my clients that they don't need to motivate themselves with self-loathing, they get scared. They're like, how else am I going to know how to do things? So I I wanted to make you aware of how we hijack our brain emotionally in order to motivate ourselves, just so that you understand that there are other ways. And I would love for you just to start running this in the background of your brain, like, "Ooh, I am trying to shame myself, and yes, I feel like this is." Oh, here's a trick that I've learned to kind of break the especially shame and self-loathing trick. Um, I use it all the time on myself, and I teach my clients. The trick is this. I'll give you the sentence. Uh, I feel, and then I say shame or self-loathing. I feel shame because I think I have to motivate myself. And when I do that, it kind of pops the bubble surrounding this, and I start to go, "Well, that's not really a fair way to motivate myself, now is it?" Now, some of you will find this very difficult to do. Just start, and you can use this with all 5, but I think it's most effective with the last 2, because the last 2 are just insidious, and they try to convince us that we're just not worth anything. So the phrase is, I feel blank, I feel anxiety, and then and then list the belief that you have around that. I feel anxiety because I'm afraid I'm not going to get motivation to do this. Or I'm avoiding right now because I'm not even sure where to start. And so to start to use that sentence, I suggest people just say it out loud, almost like in Harry Potter when you break a spell and you're like, um, "Oh, you Harry Potter fans can probably help me with a ridiculous spell." Um, so it kind of breaks the spell. So please do try that. So negative arousal is exhausting. Um, Heightened emotions demand energy and they leave us feeling depleted. A lot of us have faced burnout before, and we're exhausted. And so I'm really suggesting if we can avoid those bad tools, uh, let's try to do that. So, Tamara, what should we do? You just said don't chase dopamine all the time. All the time. You can sometimes. It's fun. And don't use negative emotions. Well, what the heck am I left with? Right? And if you're asking that question, that is a very fair question. So, I want to recommend some things today, but none of these are quick fixes. None of these are easy. So, I want to remind you have patience while you're learning this. A lot of times during this kind of talk, the listener will start to get a little anxious, like, she's taking away my anxiety, or what do you mean I can't chase dopamine? I'm not taking any of those things away. I'm really just trying to open up a conversation in yourself that there might be other options. Okay. So, one of the things you can do is regulate your emotional state before acting. I'm going to go through what that means. So, by the way, when you see a little book, sometimes people have asked me to add this. This idea comes from this book. When you see the little book, that's a quick reference. So I want to introduce the window of tolerance. So the window of tolerance is a very simple idea. You have your window of tolerance. I can never talk about it without using my hands. You have your window of tolerance, where this is your optimal functioning. And then you have hyperarousal above it and hypoarousal. Um, I was just talking to our academic coach at the ADHD Center before this, and she's like, "Oh, my students use the window of tolerance all the time." and it's been so helpful. And she works with students sixth grade and up. So for those of you who are parents listening, this is very useful. Those of you who are students out there, this is a useful tool. So let me explain a little bit more. So window of tolerance is this great place. Now, some of us with ADHD have a small window of tolerance, so you might need to use your imagination for a few moments. It's a place where you feel just present, engaged, alert, but not dopamine alert. You're just kind of relaxed alert. You access your creativity and problem solving, and it's where you just feel connected and safe. Now, I want you to think about the last time you felt like you were in your window of tolerance. If you can, write it down. So, our goal is to widen that window of tolerance so that we feel that we are in our window of tolerance longer. Now, a couple weeks ago, I had the flu. I was not in my window of tolerance the entire darn time. In fact, my pulse ox was dangerously low. I was in hypoarousal. After all the breathing treatments, I had a hard time getting back into the window of tolerance because they kind of made my nervous system a little bit too twitchy. So I went to hyper. And so sometimes when we're sick, we disturb that delicate balance. Sometimes if we have a fight with a spouse, we disturb that balance. So what we want to do is get back into this wonderful window of tolerance. So here's what the whole picture looks like again. And now we're going to go into the hyper arousal state. Okay, and we all know if you have ADHD and you're on this webinar, you know what hyperarousal is. It's when you're just chasing, putting out fires all day. It's fight or flight. It's your physiological stress response. It's when I used to scare myself out of bed, right? When I was a dean. Um, you have your anxiety, you're angry, you have this intense negative emotions. Hyperarousal can be intense positive, but for in this case, we're just going to stick with the negative. But in hyperarousal, we can't effectively connect with each other, and we really can't connect with ourselves either. So it's not a great place for us to be, and it takes a lot of energy. Now, we want to save the fight or flight stuff for when we're truly in danger. So here's the whole picture again. And remember, the window of tolerance is our optimal functioning. And then hyperarousal is when we're using too much energy. Then there's times when we use too little energy. And that's hypoarousal. In hypoarousal, I'm sure you guys can understand what this is. That's kind of our freeze response. We get avoidant, we get sluggish, we feel tired, we're slow, we're moving very slowly. And so this is a physiological response. It's usually when we're doing the death scrolling, right? And we're disconnected from ourselves and others. So now here's the window of tolerance. So I put this up here just so that you can understand that our goal, when I say to reset our emotions, is to find our window of tolerance. And you're not going to like what I'm saying because this is hard work. It is so much easier to reach for that dopamine or reach for that self-loathing. But I'm saying you're writing checks you're not going to be able to cash. It's too exhausting on you. So now let's get down to brass tacks and let me give you some examples, okay? Now, oh, whoopsies, I got ahead of myself. Here's why, if you put yourself in the window of tolerance, why this could work. It improves your cognitive flexibility. It helps you adapt and shift. It regulates hyperarousal and hypoarousal, and it reduces emotional regulation. Let me go back a second. So if you find yourself in hyperarousal, Okay, you're above the window of tolerance. You're like, holy cow, I'm too hyper right now. You can slow it down. You can do breathing, listening to music. I have clients who swear by 528 hertz. Um, there's on Spotify, there's music that for them brings them right back into the optimal window of tolerance. If you are in your shutdown, if you are hypoaroused, the hypoarousal is like, "Oh, I don't want to do the next thing." Do something that will bring energy back to your body. So one of my clients will go in and wash her hands in cold water. Another one of my clients, she lives in a different climate. She'll just go out for a quick walk around her block. Something that brings energy back and up. Okay. So if you're in hyper, and you guys know these strategies already, you know intuitively how, like, I'm in hyper arousal. I need to bring myself down. Sometimes breathing exercises will work for both hypo and hyper. Hypo arousal, too low. You'll start to work up energy by breathing quickly. Um, Use an app for it, or else you might pass out on the floor. Or hyper arousal, you're breathing slowly. There's all kinds of apps that can help you do this. There's all kinds of music that can help you. There's yoga stretches. Be creative when you're thinking through this. Okay, that's the window of tolerance. So here's another strategy. And I'm always kind of embarrassed talking about this, but people like it, and so it hasn't stopped me. Um, this started because I started imagining my ADHD symptoms as monkeys. And so one of the techniques I use to motivate myself is I have a meeting with my ADHD monkeys. And so first I'll introduce you to the monkeys. Now, all these monkeys are not in my brain. So I suggest um, the top 5 monkeys that you tend to struggle with. So for me, anxious Amy, critical Calvin, impatient Iggy, overwhelmed Oscar, and time blind Timmy are the stars of my show. And so you write down their names and you look at them and you start to listen for how they're talking to you. And by the way, these names are in your handout. So to motivate yourself, you start talking to the monkeys. So if you're just getting started in this, you want to think, okay, how is this monkey trying to help me? So before my first book came out, Your Brain's Not Broken, anxious Amy popped on my shoulder and said, Tamara, I'm really worried we've said too much. I'm really worried. Like, you are pretty vulnerable. And come on, what were you thinking? That's crazy. Critical Kelvin's like, oh, I hear you, sis. She did way too much, and we should have put a stop to this. And now people are going to just know how dumb and foolish you are, right? And guess what? I started listening to the monkeys. I'll never forget. I'm driving down the road, these 2 monkeys on my shoulder. And all of a sudden, it just took all my motivation away to do anything, um, promoting the book or anything. So those 2 monkeys in my head have an alliance. The anxious Amy, Kelvin comes to protect. Now, anxious Amy was actually trying to protect me. She's not a bad monkey. None of the monkeys are bad monkeys. They're trying in their monkey way, trying to help in some way. And so anxious Amy's like, hey, I'm trying to protect you. You're going to embarrass yourself. And critical Kelvin, he's trying to protect me too. He's just a big jerk about it. And so I've learned to talk to my monkeys. And so I want to say, all right, Amy, thanks for showing up today. I actually have to show up to this book signing. And you bring up some good points, but you know what? I don't really believe you're telling me the full truth. I think you're telling me your perspective. And thanks for trying to help me today. But no, Kelvin, I have to speak a little bit more directly to. Kelvin, I think you're out of line. You're just being mean right now. So I'm going to say no, thank you. And so it actually affects my motivation. Today, I've had a very busy week. I woke up, had a little chat with my monkeys. I'm like, listen, overwhelmed Oscar, you don't have time to show up. I'm sorry, there's a lot coming at us today, but you don't have the time. And so I'm sorry, I'm going to put you on the couch. I have a red couch that I tell them to go sit on. You have ADHD, you might as well take advantage of your imagination. So you're going to have to be in we don't have time for overwhelm today. We're going to do a lot, and frankly, you're going to mess with my emotion if you don't. And by the way, critical Kelvin, I see you showing up all the time going, what are you even doing? Are you doing anything that counts? And I have to say, Kelvin, I'm doing all the stuff I know to do right now. And so it's not helpful. I know that you're trying to help motivate me, but you're just not doing a great job. So here's why this could do. Increasing, and this is research, guys. I know the monkeys sound crazy, um, but increasing your intentional internal dialogue is absolutely positive for you. And so instead of those negative thoughts kind of whirling around like, ugh, yeah, this is, you're just going to screw this up, or this is going to go wrong, this is going to go wrong, increasing that intentional internal dialogue, and really starting to kind of understand it in more neutral terms. It doesn't even have to be positive. For those of you who can't get to the positivity, just more neutral. It evokes playful problem solving. It removes self-judgment. I don't know about you, but I judge myself quite harshly. And I've used it, I use self-judgment, which is shame and self-loathing sometimes, to try to motivate myself. It promotes self-compassion. And I have internal dialogue twice because I thought it was that important to say. So here's another technique, and this is from my first book, Your Brain's Not Broken. Connect with your aspirational self. So in every human, we have this ideal person of ourselves. Whether or not we're actually doing it or not, but we have our ideal self, right? By the way, my ideal self, I have a picture of this cactus and a person hiking. That happens to be my husband. Um, on there because I think, man, I am a person who likes to hike. And ask me the last time I went hiking, right? Ask me how frequently I go hiking. But my aspirational self's like, Tamara is a hiker. And that's okay. We all have that. So we're gonna actually touch it, try to like get into our aspirational self to motivate ourselves. So we discuss, I have discussions with my future self all the time, or I'll go, huh, what would future Tamara be happy about? And sometimes I will be giggling doing something, and my husband will go, why are you laughing about that? I'm like, because future Tamara is just going to look back and go, you go, girl. You had your stuff together that day. There are times when I wrote about this in Your Brain's Not Broken. I'll put away the Christmas decorations so wonderfully that it's a delight the next Christmas to get them out. And I've literally high-fived myself because I was so delighted at past Tamara. So that's kind of a trick for tapping into my aspirational self. By the way, my daughter happened to see me and kind of mocked me for that, but I was really proud of past Tamara at that moment. Visualize the end result. So picture like, yeah, I don't want to do this. This feels gross. But if you can use your wonderful imagination to go, but you know what? That future Tamara is going to feel so good. And then latch into that good feeling. Okay. You're actually harnessing emotions for the better there. And this is where I would say tie it into your identity. Normally, I caution people not to tie in their job to their identity or ADHD to their identity. But in this case, tie the task into your strategy. So when I was writing You, Me, and Our ADHD Family, I had long COVID. I didn't feel like writing. And I don't even know if I could put two thoughts together. My brain was so foggy. And I just remember saying to myself, you know, I need to write, I need to write, I need to write. Oh my gosh, I have a book deadline and I need to write. So one day it dawned on me, how about I just change this? I'm an author. Authors write. So I'll just show up and write today. And changing that made it different in my head because I latched into that aspirational self and started to work that way. So connect. Here's some other ones. Use identity-based affirmations. So instead of saying I need to be productive today, um, you can say I'm someone who does this. I am someone who follows through on my ideas, or I'm someone who does this thing that you're trying to do. That is like my character. Create a future self playlist. So this is you make a whole bunch of music where you are like, yeah, I love this song. It motivates me. It reminds me of who my ideal self is. And if you can find that music, that's fantastic. And play that when you want to motivate yourself. Place visual reminders. Um, so like a sticky note, what would future me do? Um, I ask that a lot. Like I'll look at my list and go, "Oh, what would future me do here?" And so I play out the conversation in my head or play out the situation. Again, you'll notice I'm using my imagination for all of these. Why am I doing that? Because imagination kind of begins in the DMN, right behind the prefrontal cortex, and it goes throughout the brain. But I'm using stronger parts of our brain instead of the just do it. Where's my just do it button? Well, if you have ADHD, you may not have one. Okay, so why these strategies could work for you? It creates an emotional pull that feels meaningful and exciting. It provides like this internal compass for decision making. That's like, who do I want to be in this situation? I want to be a person who finishes things. It makes for the future to feel real and relevant. So there's this positive sense of urgency. A lot of times it reminds us that setbacks are temporary. So instead of spiraling into shame, we can kind of shift this in our brain to for the DMN. It encourages identity-based habits instead of relying on willpower. Because, guys, we've got to stop relying on willpower. That's our weakest muscle. All right. So, right now, I've gone through a lot of strategies. I want you to take a moment and think, what's one thing that you've learned today? And take a second. If you're not able to write this down, if you're driving, or cleaning that sock drawer, say it out loud to yourself. What is one thing that you've learned today? And then answer, why is that one thing important to know? All right, now here's the bonus round. What's one strategy that you're interested in trying today or tomorrow? What's just one strategy? And what do you need to do to begin that strategy? What's the thing that has to happen before you start the strategy? All right. I want to thank you for listening today. I appreciate the time that you have spent with us, and just thank you for having an open mind. I've said a couple tough things today that I'm really asking you to kind of push past the old reliables, and I know it's going to be hard. So thank you so much.